Hey, welcome back to Minute 60. Tonight, we're diving into 6 scary, true home intrusion horror stories, a collection of real-life events that will stick with you long after the lights go out. Before we begin, I want to know, where are you listening from tonight? Are you tucked in your bed somewhere in the US or sneaking your headphones on somewhere else? Drop a comment and let me know. I love seeing who's brave enough to join me in the dark. Now, keep your lights low, headphones on, and imagination ready, because one of the story might just stay with you long after the video ends. Before anything terrifying happened, it was just a normal evening. She had spent the day in lectures, grabbed a coffee with her friend, and returned to her small, older apartment. The kind of building where the floors creak with every step, the walls are thin, and the hallways feel a little too quiet at night. She set down her backpack and began her nightly routine. Checking emails, scrolling social media, texting a friend about homework. The wind rattled the windows slightly, and streetlights outside cast long, flickering shadows across the walls. At first, she shrugged. "It's just the wind," she whispered to herself, unaware that this was the calm before everything changed. She made herself a simple dinner, laughing at a funny meme her friend sent. She felt safe, normal, completely unaware of how quickly that feeling would vanish. After dinner, she cleaned up and returned to her desk to study. Textbooks open, laptop glowing, notes scattered across the table. Hours passed. Her eyes ached. Her brain was tired. She sipped her coffee and rubbed her eyes, trying to focus, all while the room slowly darkened as the night pressed in. The quiet of the apartment suddenly felt heavy. She noticed the small things she hadn't before. The way the hallway light flickered like a heartbeat, shadows stretching across the walls, the faint rustling of leaves outside. She told herself it was nothing, but her stomach tightened. Every small noise sounded louder than it should. A floorboard creak here, a distant thump there. Her mind raced through possibilities. She stood to stretch, walking toward the kitchen to grab a glass of water. Each step sounded like thunder in the empty hall. She noticed tiny things, a shadow lingering longer than it should, the wind tapping gently on the windows, a faint squeak in the ceiling above. Her pulse quickened. Her imagination began to fill in the blanks. Footsteps behind her, someone in the hallway. She whispered, "It's fine, it's nothing." But her instincts were screaming. Sitting back down, she noticed her laptop's light casting shadows that seemed to twitch in the corner of her eye. The ordinary evening began to feel strange. The shadows seemed alive. The silence pressed in. Every small sound became magnified. The world outside felt distant, and the room suddenly felt smaller, tighter, more confining. She pinched herself. Nothing. Just her mind playing tricks. Right? She glanced at the hallway again, almost expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing. Just shadows. Still her heart beat faster. She tried to focus on her notes, but every creak, every gust of wind, every flicker of the light made her jump. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. She told herself to calm down, to stay rational, but the unease had settled in. It was thick, crawling, lingering, and then the first knock came. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, deliberate, measured. Not a mistake, not random. She froze. Her heart leapt. Her stomach twisted. Something was outside. Something was waiting. She froze in place, staring at the door. Her pulse was hammering so loudly she was sure he could hear it from the other side. "It's probably just someone knocking the wrong door," she whispered to herself, though the thought did nothing to calm her racing heart. The hallway outside was silent. except for the faint hum of the heater. She took a slow, shallow breath, trying to steady herself. Another knock came, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Each strike deliberate, measured, as if testing her patience, testing her fear. Her fingers trembled as she gripped her phone. Should she call someone? Should she just stay quiet and pretend she wasn't home? She debated each choice for what felt like hours in seconds. Her mind went through every possible scenario, every horror story she'd ever read, every warning she'd ever heard about strangers and danger. She crept closer to the door, her bare feet silent on the floorboards. The shadows in the hallway stretched unnaturally, flickering with the motion of her cautious steps. The wind rattled the window blinds, sounding almost like whispers. Every small noise made her jump, a floorboard creak, the distant hum of traffic, the faint tapping of a branch against the window. She tried to focus on breathing, on rational thoughts, but her imagination had taken over. What if it's someone dangerous? What if they've been watching me all evening? She pressed herself closer to the wall, keeping her body as low and quiet as possible. The knocks continued, slow, persistent, unrelenting. Knock, knock, knock. She felt her chest tighten. It was like the sound had a physical weight, pressing against her, demanding her attention. She whispered to herself, "It's okay. It's okay. It's nothing." But her voice cracked, barely audible. The silence that followed each knock was almost worse than the knocks themselves. Her ears strained, trying to catch any other sound, the faintest creak of the floor, the subtle rattle of the window, the soft hum of her fridge. Everything became amplified, menacing. Then she remembered the old advice she had read in a self-defense blog. If you hear someone outside, don't open the door, stay calm, call for help. Her fingers shook over the phone screen as she dialed 911. The line rang, each ring a reminder that she was alone, vulnerable. When the dispatcher finally answered, she could barely speak. Her words stumbled over each other, her voice trembling. She whispered her address, trying not to let him hear. While staying on the phone, she pressed herself flat against the wall, trying to disappear. The knocking stopped for a brief moment. She dared to peek through the peephole, expecting maybe a neighbor. Maybe nothing. And then she saw him. A tall figure, hoodie pulled tight over his face, head tilted slightly back so she could see only the outline of his mouth. He was smiling, not politely, not friendly, but wide, unnaturally wide. Her stomach dropped, her breath caught. He's out there. Watching. Waiting. She stumbled back, clutching her phone. The dispatcher asked if anyone was in the apartment, and her trembling voice barely managed yes. "I'm alone." She could hear herself breathing in short, panicked bursts. The air seemed too heavy, too thick. The fear had seeped into her chest, her limbs, her mind. Then the scratching began. Slow, deliberate, across the door. She jumped, pressed herself tighter to the wall. Every hair on her arms stood on end. It was no longer a knock. It was a message. Someone testing her, taunting her, telling her that she wasn't safe. Minutes passed, like hours. She whispered prayers, trying to calm her mind. Every time she thought he might have left, every time the silence returned, she felt relief, immediately followed by the anticipation of the next sound. And when the knocking resumed, louder, more forceful, she realized there was no escaping it. Not yet. The ordinary evening had vanished. Every sound, every shadow, every flicker of light had transformed into potential danger. She wasn't just scared, she was aware, hyper-aware, alive to every single detail, every single movement, every single creak in the walls. And in that moment she understood, this wasn't a mistake. This wasn't random. The person outside knew she was home. The person outside knew she was alone. The person outside was playing a game, and she hadn't agreed to participate. She pressed her eye to the peephole, trying not to breathe too loudly. The hallway seemed empty at first, but the shadows, they didn't look right. They stretched and shifted unnaturally. Her pulse raced, her hands were clammy, shaking as they gripped the door. And then she saw him, a tall figure, hoodie pulled tight over his face, head tilted just enough so she could see the outline of his mouth. And that smile, too wide, too deliberate, as if he was savoring her fear. She stumbled back, nearly dropping her phone, whispering a shaky, "Oh no, oh no." She crouched on the floor, pressing herself against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. Every sound, the hum of the heater, the slight creak of the floor, even her own breathing, felt magnified. Her mind ran through every scenario. What if he comes in? What if he's been watching me all day? What if he knows I'm alone? The knocking started again. Slow, methodical, testing, scratching, dragging across the door like a warning. She flinched with every sound, curling in on herself. Minutes passed in tense silence. She dared to peek through the peephole again. The hallway was empty. Maybe he'd gone. Relief washed over her. Fleeting, fragile relief. And then her eyes flicked to the kitchen window. He was there, pressed against the glass, watching her, smiling, immobile, almost statue-like, yet terrifyingly alive. She pressed her palms over her face, taking shallow breaths, trying to convince herself it was a trick of the shadows. Her phone was still clutched in her trembling hands. The dispatcher on the other end of 911 remained calm, asking questions she could barely answer. She whispered her address again, voice cracking. She stayed crouched, trying to measure every sound, every movement, every possibility. She remembered the advice she had read in self-defense forums. If someone is outside, do not open the door. Stay quiet, stay hidden, call for help. But even as she told herself that, her mind imagined the worst-case scenario. Footsteps moving down the hallway, his hand on the doorknob, the click of a lock turning. The shadows in the apartment seemed to grow longer, reaching toward her. Every object, the desk, the chair, the piles of books, became potential hiding spots. Or worse, potential weapons for him. She whispered prayers, trying to calm her body, trying to slow her heartbeat. Time stretched. Seconds felt like hours. Every tiny sound made her jump. A creak of a floorboard? She froze. A whisper of wind? She held her breath. Every flicker of light felt like someone moving outside, peering in. And then came the softest, most terrifying sound. A faint tap on the kitchen window, almost inaudible but unmistakable. He was there, watching, waiting. She squeezed her eyes shut, her body shaking uncontrollably. She thought about her family, her friends, her life outside these walls. "I have to survive this," she whispered. "I have to survive this." Even now, in the safe daylight hours that would come later, she would tell herself that moment. The shadow in the window, the unnatural smile, the waiting figure was burned into her memory. And she knew. She would never forget it. She dropped to the floor, pressing herself against the bedroom wall. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold her phone. The dispatcher's voice on the other end of 911 was calm, almost eerily calm, but she could barely speak. Every word came out in broken whispers. Then it started. The scratching. Slow, deliberate, dragging across the wood of her apartment door. Each scrape sounded impossibly loud. Her stomach twisted. She clutched the wall behind her, trying to feel grounded. "It's just a prank. It's nothing." she muttered to herself, but her voice sounded hollow, unconvincing. Minutes dragged on. Her imagination raced. She pictured him moving silently in the hallway, bending low to peek under doors, breathing lightly, waiting for her to make a noise. Every shadow in her room seemed to shift, as if leaning closer, as if alive. Her thoughts spiraled. What if he has a weapon? What if he's been watching me for hours? She pictured him studying her habits, learning when she sleeps, when she eats, when she lets her guard down. Her pulse hammered. Her mind alternated between rational thought and sheer terror. She considered running, crawling out the window, jumping from the balcony, but she was trapped. The apartment felt smaller now, closing in around her. Every object, chair, desk, books, became a potential threat, a potential hiding place, or a tool in the wrong hands. Then came the whisper. Low, almost inside her head. I know you're there. Her knees buckled. She pressed her face to the floor, trying to disappear, trying to convince herself it was her imagination, but deep down she knew it was real. He was there, waiting, watching. The scratching grew louder, more deliberate. Tap, tap, drag, tap. It was testing her, taunting her, measuring her fear. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but she couldn't. Her body was frozen. She tried to calm her shaking hands, tried to slow her breathing, tried to find rationality in the chaos. Time stretched unbearably. Seconds became minutes. The knocking had stopped for just long enough to make her believe she might be safe. And then the subtle sound of footsteps in the hallway, soft, deliberate, slow. She could almost hear him counting her movements, gauging her panic. She whispered prayers under her breath, tried to steady her mind, but every sound, the creak of a floorboard, the hum of the heater, the faint gust of wind against the window, felt like confirmation that he was still out there. Her phone's flashlight trembled in her grip. She thought about calling someone, screaming, doing anything to break the spell of fear. But her instincts froze her in place. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every scratch and knock intensified the terror. And then a new sound, soft, deliberate tapping on the kitchen window. He was there, watching, smiling, immobile, patient, waiting for her to make a mistake. She closed her eyes, pressed herself flat against the floor, trying to disappear entirely. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to move, to run, but she stayed frozen. She whispered again, I have to survive. I have to survive. The night stretched on, every second feeling like an hour. And in that room, crouched against the wall, she realized something horrifying. The ordinary evening she thought she had was gone, completely gone, and in its place, fear, raw and unrelenting. She crouched against the wall, heart pounding like a drum. The scratching and knocking had paused just long enough to make her think maybe he'd gone. Relief washed over her, but only for a moment. Her eyes flicked to the kitchen window, and there he was, standing perfectly still, pressed against the glass, watching her. The streetlight illuminated his face just enough to see the outline of that terrifying smile. Not friendly, not polite, but wide and deliberate. Her hands shook violently. Her phone trembled as she clutched it, still connected to the 911 dispatcher. She whispered her location again, voice barely audible. She imagined the dispatcher hearing her shallow, panicked breaths and frantic whispers. I'm alone. Please, help. Minutes dragged on. She couldn't move, couldn't even breathe without fear. Every shadow in her apartment seemed alive. The light from her laptop flickered, stretching shapes across the walls that weren't there before. Or maybe they were. Her mind spiraled into memories and what-ifs. She remembered her sister warning her about strangers lurking outside apartments, stories of people being watched, followed, terrorized. She imagined him outside all day, studying her, learning her patterns, waiting for her to relax. Every ordinary moment from earlier in the evening now felt like a trap. The tapping returned, soft, measured, against the kitchen window. Each tap a heartbeat, each pause a promise of danger. She tried to stay quiet, whispering prayers she barely remembered, focusing on breathing. Her mind raced with survival strategies. Should she run, hide in the closet, jump out the window? Every option seemed worse than the last. She pressed herself lower to the floor, her thoughts a tangled mess of fear and logic. Then, faint movement. A shadow passed across the window, subtle but undeniable. Her stomach dropped. He was still there, watching, waiting, patient, calculating. She had no idea what he was planning or if he had planned it for days. Tears welled in her eyes. She thought of her family, friends, everyone she cared about. She whispered, "I have to survive this. I have to survive this." The mantra repeated in her head, a fragile thread holding her together. Hours seemed to pass in those 10 minutes. Every creak, every gust of wind, every faint sound from outside magnified her fear. Her imagination painted scenarios of him entering, approaching, watching, breathing behind her. She fought to stay rational, telling herself he couldn't be inside. But doubt crept in. The scratching at the door returned, dragging slowly across the wood. Then silence. Then another tap at the window. Then silence. And in that unbearable tension, she understood. He could be anywhere. Just beyond the walls, just outside the frame of her vision. And there was nothing she could do, except wait. She pressed herself flat against the wall, every nerve in her body screaming at her to run, to move, to do something. But she couldn't. Her mind spun faster than her heart, replaying every sound, every shadow, every possibility. What if he's inside now? What if he's been watching me all along? What if he knows I'm alone? Her imagination took over, filling the empty hallway with shadows that weren't there. She pictured him lurking just beyond the doorway, bending low to peek under doors, hovering near the stairs, silently counting her steps. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind, every flicker of light became confirmation that he was moving, calculating, ready. She whispered to herself, trying to stay sane. Stay calm. Stay calm. Just breathe. But each breath was shallow, uneven, trembling. She imagined his shadow creeping along the walls, reaching toward her. She imagined his hand brushing against the doorknob, testing the lock. She imagined the slow, deliberate scratching starting again, dragging across the wood with sadistic precision. Her eyes darted to every corner of the room, to every hallway, to every window. She replayed every ordinary sound from earlier in the day and twisted it into something sinister. A car door slamming outside was a warning. The hum of her fridge became a hidden whisper. The wind rattling the blinds sounded like footsteps approaching. She tried to convince herself she was imagining things, but her body refused to comply. Every muscle tensed, every nerve screamed, every hair on her arms stood on end. Her pulse pounded in her ears like a drumbeat. Her mind alternated between desperate rationality, "It's nothing, it's just the building," and pure terror. "He's right outside, he knows I'm alone, and he's going to get in." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. She imagined different scenarios, hiding in the closet, crawling to the window, running past him, calling someone, screaming, fighting back. Each thought ended the same way, paralyzed by fear. She whispered prayers under her breath. She repeated her mantra, "I have to survive. I have to survive." The repetition barely kept her from unraveling completely. Then came the scratching again. Slow, calculated, dragging across the door like a message. Tap, drag, tap. Her stomach twisted. She tried to slow her breathing, to calm herself, but the sound drilled into her mind, louder with every second. She glanced at the window again, just enough to catch a shadow flicker. He was still there, watching, patient, smiling, waiting. The sight sent a fresh wave of panic through her body. Her legs felt weak, her hands icy. She pressed herself against the wall, willing herself invisible. Time stretched on. Every creak, every wind gust, every scratch, every shadow, every imagined movement became a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She realized she couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even think without fear consuming her. And in the middle of that suffocating, heart-stopping tension, she understood the truth. Fear had taken over completely. It wasn't just the knocking or the scratching or the shadow outside. It was the knowledge that at any moment the unknown could strike, and she had no control over it. The distant wail of sirens cut through the night like a lifeline thrown across a stormy sea. Her ears perked up, heart hammering. Red and blue lights flickered across the walls as police cars pulled up outside. Relief washed over her, fragile but real. She scrambled to her feet, clutching her phone, nearly dropping it in her panic. The dispatcher's voice guided her through what to do next. Stay put, keep calm, let the officers in. She trembled, but she did as she was told. The apartment door opened slowly. Officers moved with deliberate care, flashlights slicing through the darkness, scanning every corner, every shadow. She could hear their radios crackle, their quiet murmurs giving her a strange mix of reassurance and terror. They checked the hallway first. Empty. Then they moved inside. She followed cautiously, staying close to the wall, still hyper-aware of every sound. Every shadow in the room now seemed smaller, less threatening, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. The officers examined the apartment carefully. The scratches on the door, the handprint on the kitchen window, the disheveled state of her belongings, proof that she hadn't imagined it. Her stomach twisted as they documented every detail, asking questions she answered shakily. Her voice trembled with relief, fear, and disbelief. She asked if he was caught, if he might still be nearby. The officers shook their heads. They explained that similar incidents had been reported. Someone fitting his description had been seen near other apartments earlier that evening. The realization hit her. He might still be out there, watching, waiting for someone else. Even after the police left, she couldn't relax. Every creak, every shadow, every gust of wind made her flinch. Sleep felt impossible. Her apartment, once familiar and safe, now felt foreign and threatening. She moved a week later, but the fear didn't leave. She replayed every moment in her mind, the first knock, the scratches on the door, the shadow at the window, the long minutes of waiting, frozen, praying. Even daylight hours couldn't erase the memory of that terrifying night. And the worst part? The thought that someone, somewhere, could be out there, repeating the same nightmare for someone else. That knowledge lingered, like a shadow she couldn't shake, a constant reminder that danger often hides in ordinary places, waiting for the perfect moment. The midnight knocking wasn't just a story she survived, it became a warning etched into her memory forever. She sat on the edge of her bed long after the police had left, the apartment silent but heavy, thick with the memory of what had just happened. Her hands were still shaking, her heart still racing. Every little sound, the hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, the distant wind against the window, made her flinch. She thought back to the first knock, that deliberate, slow tapping that had shattered her evening. How ordinary life had turned into something terrifying in seconds. How quickly shadows could become monsters. How a single person, unseen, could control her fear so completely. Her mind wandered to the whispers she imagined, the shadow at the window, the dragging of nails across the door. Each memory was vivid, each detail burned into her brain. The fear hadn't left. Even now, hours later, she felt watched, as if he might still be out there, somewhere. She closed her eyes and tried to breathe, trying to convince herself she was safe. And yet, the ordinary evening, the sense of normalcy she had taken for granted, had been permanently altered. She understood now that the world was full of moments like this. Ordinary spaces hiding danger, normal routines masking terror. Her thoughts drifted to other stories she had heard, rumors whispered in the neighborhood, warnings from friends, strange noises in empty houses, doors scratched for no reason, shadows at windows. She realized that her story wasn't unique, and somewhere, someone else might be experiencing the same fear she had just survived. And that's when it hit her. The connection between fear and story. Every terrifying experience is a lesson, a warning, a story worth telling. And if she had survived the night, then she could share it. She could tell it. She could make others aware, make them pause, make them notice the shadows, the creaks, the whispers. Her fingers hovered over her laptop keyboard. She thought about recording her experience, sharing it with others who loved true, scary stories. And as she typed the first words, she realized something chilling. Her story didn't end here. Because just as one night of fear can teach you caution, it can also remind you that danger lurks in more places than you think. And speaking of danger, there are more stories, more true events that make you question the safety of your own home, the streets you walk, and the quiet moments before bed. So, if you thought the midnight knocking was terrifying, buckle up. The next story takes us somewhere even closer to home, where the shadows move differently, and the intruders don't just knock. They invade. Are you ready to step into the next story? To experience what it's like when the terror comes inside, unannounced, uninvited, and unstoppable? Then let's continue. The night was quiet, eerily quiet. Unlike the first story, there was no creaking floorboards, no distant traffic, no wind rattling the windows. Just silence. And yet, she didn't feel safe. Something in the air told her that tonight wouldn't be ordinary. It started with a small sound, a thump from the living room, soft, almost inaudible, easily dismissed as the building settling. She froze. Her cat, normally curled up on the sofa, hissed and bolted under the table. That instinctive reaction made her stomach knot. Something wasn't right. She got up, walking slowly, cautiously, toward the kitchen to check. Her bare feet barely made a sound, but every shadow along the hallway seemed to stretch, reaching toward her. The thump came again, slightly louder. This time she couldn't ignore it. She whispered to herself. It's probably nothing. Just the house, the fridge, maybe the cat. But she knew the truth. Her body told her something was wrong. The hair on her arms stood on end. Her chest tightened. Every nerve screamed at her to leave, to hide, to run. Her phone was in her hand. She thought about calling 911, but paused. What if it was too late? What if he was already inside? Her mind raced through every scenario, each one more terrifying than the last. The living room was dark, the blinds closed, but a faint shadow moved near the window. She squinted, her pulse hammering. The silhouette was small at first, just a flicker, easily mistaken for the curtains. But it moved deliberately, creeping closer to the glass. She ducked behind the corner of the wall, barely breathing. Every instinct told her to scream, to run, to grab something to defend herself, but she stayed frozen. Her heart raced as she imagined him stepping inside, walking silently across her living room, noticing every object, every small detail of her life. The thumps became more deliberate. Footsteps, not random, not careless, someone moving inside her home. Her stomach churned. She had no weapons, no plan, nothing except her instincts and a phone to call for help. She dialed 911, whispering her address, her voice trembling. The dispatcher instructed her to stay put, remain quiet, and keep herself hidden. She pressed herself against the wall, trying to disappear, feeling the adrenaline surge through her veins. Every sound became amplified. The fridge hum, the ticking clock, even the faint rustle of the curtains in the window. They all became part of the terror. And the shadow, near the window, didn't move randomly. It paused, as if listening, waiting, observing. She remembered stories she had heard about home intrusions, the ones people whispered about online, the ones that sounded like cautionary tales. She never thought it would happen to her. And yet, here she was, trapped in her own living room, watching someone move silently, deliberately, inside her home, minutes stretched into eternity. She whispered prayers under her breath, repeating, "I have to survive this. I have to survive this." Her thoughts bounced between rational strategies and pure panic. Every possible outcome, good or bad, played out in her mind. And as the shadow moved closer to the edge of the window, she realized the truth. The danger wasn't outside, it was inside, and she was completely, terrifyingly alone. She pressed herself against the wall, barely daring to breathe. Every heartbeat sounded like thunder in the quiet apartment. The shadow near the window hadn't moved, but she knew it was watching, calculating. Each second stretched, thick with fear. Her hands shook as she gripped her phone tighter, ready to call 911 again if needed. But she didn't dare make a sound. Even the tiniest noise could give her away. Every instinct screamed at her to act, to run, to escape. But the apartment felt like a trap, a cage closing in around her. She could hear soft footsteps now, deliberate, careful, moving across the living room. Not hurried, patient. Her mind raced through possibilities. He could be looking for something, checking if anyone was home, planning his next move. The ordinary evening she had thought would be peaceful had vanished entirely. She glanced toward the kitchen. Maybe she could sneak past, maybe she could reach the door. But then a shadow shifted, catching her eye. He was closer than she had realized. She ducked lower, pressed herself flat, willing herself invisible. Her thoughts flickered to her family and friends, and she imagined telling them later, recounting this moment in vivid detail. But in the present, she couldn't think beyond survival. Every sense was heightened. The faint hum of the fridge, the creak of the floor, the whisper of curtains brushing the window. Each amplified, each signaling danger. The footsteps paused. The shadow lingered. She could feel its presence like a cold weight in the room. She held her breath, counting silently, hoping the pause was just temporary. And then the scratching started, dragging slowly across the wood of her living room door. Her stomach dropped. Tap, drag, tap. Deliberate, methodical, not a mistake, not random, a message, a warning. She pressed her palms over her face, shivering violently, trying to disappear entirely. Time moved slowly. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. She whispered prayers, repeated her mantra, "I have to survive this, that I have to survive this." Her voice cracked each time. Her heart raced. Every shadow in the apartment seemed alive, moving, stretching closer. Then came a new sound, the softest scrape near the hallway. Her pulse leapt. He was moving, creeping along, silent, careful, yet terrifyingly deliberate. Her mind raced with options: hide in the closet, crawl to the door, grab something to defend herself. But each choice felt impossible, dangerous, and her body refused to move. She realized she had no control. The intruder dictated every second, every heartbeat, every breath. The ordinary evening, the comfort of her own home, the sense of safety she had always taken for granted. All gone. And in that moment, she understood something terrifying. The fear wasn't just about him. It was about what he represented, the complete loss of control, the knowledge that danger can slip in quietly, anywhere, at any time. And she was living it. She pressed herself flat against the wall, her back nearly touching the cold baseboard. Her chest heaved, her breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. Every sound, the faint hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, even the soft rustle of the curtains, made her flinch. The shadow she had glimpsed earlier moved slowly across the room. Not hurried, not clumsy, but deliberate. She imagined it pausing, listening, studying her. Her stomach tightened so sharply she almost couldn't breathe. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, to hide, to do something, anything. But her instincts kept her frozen. Her eyes darted toward the hallway. A faint outline shifted in the darkness. Her pulse spiked. Her mind raced through every possible scenario. What if he had already seen her? What if he was inside the apartment, just waiting for her to make a sound? Each thought was worse than the last. She whispered to herself, stay calm, just breathe." Her voice was barely audible, trembling, as if even the sound might alert him. She inched backwards slightly, careful not to make a noise, wishing she could sink into the floor and disappear entirely. Then came a faint creak, the sound of a floorboard moving. She froze completely. Her mind imagined him moving closer, testing the boundaries, circling her like a predator. Tap, drag, tap. The sound of nails across the door echoed in her ears, each beat a sharp reminder of how vulnerable she was. Her thoughts flickered to the worst-case scenarios. He could grab her if she moved. He could have a weapon. He could be inside, right behind her, just waiting for her to panic. Every corner of the room suddenly felt threatening. The couch, the coffee table, the bookshelf, all potential hiding places or traps. Minutes felt like hours. Her breathing was shallow, her body trembling uncontrollably. She clutched her phone, ready to call 911 again, but terrified that even a whisper might give her away. Her eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see a figure outside. But the street beyond was empty, still silent, but somehow no less menacing. And then movement near the living room entrance. A shadow shifted, stretching long across the floor. She held her breath, wishing her body could become invisible. Her heart raced so violently she was sure he could hear it. Tap, tap, scrape. The sound was deliberate, methodical, and it cut through the silence like a warning. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering under her breath, "I have to survive this. I have to survive this." Each repetition was a lifeline, a thread keeping her from being swallowed by fear. She imagined him seeing her if she moved, and the thought made her muscles tighten, her body locked in place. Time crawled. Every creak, every shadow, every faint brush of air felt like it carried his presence. She realized something terrifying. Even when he wasn't visible, she could feel him, watching, waiting, calculating, and the thought that her ordinary home had become a place of danger pressed down on her like a physical weight. And there she stayed, pressed against the wall, trapped between fear and instinct, listening to every sound, counting every second, knowing she had no choice but to wait, and hope she survived. Her body pressed against the wall, every muscle tense, every nerve alert. The intruder's presence felt larger than the room itself, filling every corner, every shadow, every inch of air with dread. She couldn't see him, but she could feel him moving, listening, waiting. The soft, deliberate scraping on the living room door returned. Tap, drag, tap. Each sound drilled into her mind. She tried to slow her breathing, tried to tell herself it was just her imagination, but fear refused to let her lie to herself. She inched slightly, just enough to peek toward the hallway. A shadow shifted again, just beyond her vision. Her pulse spiked and her stomach twisted. She imagined him moving closer, testing the apartment, calculating her next move. Her hands gripped her phone, flashlight trembling as the beam lit the edges of furniture. Every familiar object, the sofa, the coffee table, the bookshelf, suddenly seemed threatening. She imagined him stepping over them, brushing past, so close she could feel his presence. Minutes stretched, stretching the suspense like rubber. Every faint noise, only the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of floorboards, the rustle of curtains, became magnified, amplified in her mind, signaling danger. Tap, tap, scratch. The rhythm felt deliberate, like he was communicating, like he was savoring her fear. She whispered prayers, repeating her mantra. I have to survive this. I have to survive this. Her lips moved silently, barely audible, each repetition a lifeline tethering her to hope. The shadow moved again, closer to the center of the room. She pressed herself lower, wishing she could melt into the floor. Every instinct told her to run, but rationality screamed that moving would be deadly. She imagined the worst, him turning, spotting her, approaching with calculated intent. And then a faint sound from the balcony. A light tapping, almost imperceptible. Her heart stopped. She realized he wasn't just in the room. He had multiple points of access, multiple ways to watch, multiple ways to terrify. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Her mind played out countless scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. She thought about her family, about telling them later, about the story she would recount. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Survival was all that mattered. She closed her eyes briefly, drawing a shaky breath, repeating her mantra yet again. And even as she counted seconds, listening to every sound, feeling every shadow, she understood one chilling truth. Fear wasn't just a feeling tonight. It was reality, pressing in on her from every side, inescapable and relentless. The sound of sirens cut through the night, distant at first, then growing louder, a lifeline slicing through the suffocating tension. She barely dared to breathe as red and blue lights flickered across the walls of her apartment. Relief and fear tangled inside her chest. She clutched her phone tightly, hands shaking, as the dispatcher guided her. Stay calm, keep hidden, wait for the officers to enter. Her eyes darted toward the hallway, every shadow seeming alive, every creak of the floor, every rustle of curtains felt like the intruder's movement. But it wasn't. It was help arriving. The officers entered cautiously, flashlights scanning every corner. The soft hum of their radios, the click of boots on the floor, even the calm instructions they gave, all felt surreal. She pressed herself against the wall, watching as they carefully swept the apartment. The living room, the kitchen, every hallway, every window was checked. The scratches on the door, the displaced furniture, the faint footprints near the balcony. Proof that it had all been real. Her stomach twisted as she realized how close she had been, how carefully he had moved around her. The intruder had fled, leaving only evidence of his presence. Relief began to wash over her, fragile and trembling. She sank to the floor, finally letting herself breathe, tears streaming down her face. Fear still lingered, but at least it was no longer immediate. The officers explained that they would patrol the area, review any nearby reports, and attempt to locate him. But the thought that he could still be out there, somewhere else, made her chest tighten. Even in safety, the memory pressed against her, vivid, unrelenting. She replayed every detail: the shadow, the scraping nails, the deliberate footsteps, the tapping at the door. Every sound had been real, every moment a fight between survival and terror. And even after the intruder had gone, even after the police had left, she understood something crucial. Ordinary places could hide extraordinary danger. Her home, once safe, had become a theatre of fear. And while she had survived, she could never forget. Her hands still shook as she sat in the quiet apartment. She whispered to herself, I survived, I survived. The words were both a relief and a warning, echoing in the silence. And as she finally allowed herself to stand, she realized the night had changed her. Not just her apartment, not just her routine, but the way she saw the world, shadows, sounds, ordinary spaces, all carried a new weight, a new awareness. And she knew she would tell this story, not just as a warning, but as a reminder. Terror can strike quietly, anywhere and at any time. Even after the intruder had fled, even after the police had assured her she was safe, the fear didn't fully leave. Her home, once familiar, now felt fragile. Every shadow, every sound carried weight, a reminder that danger could appear anywhere, at any time. And as she reflected on that night, she realized something else. Fear isn't limited to one place. It doesn't respect walls, doors, or homes. It follows us into streets, into classrooms, into hallways where we least expect it. I remembered stories I had heard, true events that seemed ordinary at first, just like her night had seemed normal until the terror began. Stories of schools going into lockdown, of students trapped, hearing things they weren't meant to hear, feeling things they weren't meant to feel. It's strange, isn't it? How fear connects us, even across different moments, different people, different locations. The same feeling that gripped her during that home intrusion. The uncertainty, the pulse-pounding suspense, the unknown presence lurking just beyond reach, can happen anywhere. So if you thought the danger ended with the night she survived, think again. There are places we assume as safe, routines we trust, and yet shadows can slip through cracks, footsteps can echo in empty halls, and fear can find its way in when we least expect it. And that brings us to our next story, being a school, ordinary and everyday, that suddenly becomes a place of suspense, of unseen threats and of quiet terror that makes you question every hallway, every locked door, and every shadow. Are you ready to step back into the unknown, to feel what it's like when the walls you trust could hide danger and every ordinary sound could mean something sinister? Then let's continue into the next true story. The creepy school lockdown. Even after surviving the home intrusion, she couldn't shake the feeling that danger could appear anywhere. That thought lingered as she walked into school one ordinary afternoon. Halls buzzing with students, lockers slamming, sneakers squeaking on polished floors. Everything seemed normal. Too normal. She paused near her locker, noticing the flicker of the fluorescent lights overhead. A shadow stretched across the linoleum floor, just for a moment, and she stopped. Her gut told her something was off. There was a tension in the air she couldn't explain, a heaviness that made her chest tighten. Then the announcement came over the intercom. Calm, almost too calm. "Attention students, please follow lockdown procedures immediately." Her stomach dropped. Lockdowns weren't routine here. Panic bubbled quietly under the surface, and she glanced at her friends. Their faces mirrored her unease. She bolted to the nearest classroom, heart hammering. The teacher calmly guided them through the drill. Lock the door, pull down the blinds, move away from windows. But something about this lockdown felt different. The usual dull routine of a drill had vanished. Silence swallowed the halls. No chatter, no footsteps, just tension. She huddled in a corner with her friends, their whispers trembling in the quiet. Every creak of the floor, every faint hum from the air vents, even the distant slam of a locker in another hallway made her jump. Every sound was amplified, magnified by fear. Through the blinds, she glimpsed movement. A shadow, long and deliberate, passed across the hallway. Not a student, not a teacher, something else. Her heart raced as she realized the building that usually felt safe was now a maze of uncertainty. Her mind spun with questions. Was someone inside? How could this happen? Why now? The unknown stretched in every corner, every door, every hallway, every locker could be hiding something sinister. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. She whispered to herself, trying to stay calm. Just stay quiet, stay calm, survive this. Her friends mirrored her tension, each one pressing closer together, seeking comfort, yet unable to escape the fear that filled the room. And in that still, eerie silence, she understood something she hadn't before. Fear isn't about what you can see. It's about what you can't see, what you imagine, and how your mind fills every empty space with possibility. The school, usually ordinary and safe, had become a place of suspense, of waiting, of quiet terror that made every ordinary sound. A locker closing, a door shifting, a distant footstep, a potential threat. She pressed herself closer to the wall, the edge of the classroom her only shield. The hallway beyond the blinds was silent, almost too silent. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to stay perfectly still, to move only when absolutely necessary. She could hear faint noises, a distant locker clanging, a soft scuff of shoes far down the hall, the hum of the air vents above. Each sound made her heart race faster. It wasn't just noise, it was possibility, uncertainty, the unknown waiting just out of sight. Her friends whispered, their voices barely audible. "Do you think someone is out there?" one asked. She shook her head, swallowing the lump in her throat. She didn't know. She could only hope it was a drill, a mistake, but instinct told her otherwise. A shadow moved across the hallway, long, deliberate, not a student, not a teacher. She caught a glimpse of it as it passed the classroom door, fleeting, almost unreal. Her pulse spiked. Her mind immediately ran through every scenario, every rumor she had ever heard about school lockdowns gone wrong. She imagined someone stalking the halls, silent, patient, calculating. Each creak of the floorboards, each faint shuffle, each whisper of the wind against the window could be him, or them, or someone else entirely. The uncertainty gnawed at her. Minutes crawled, time stretched like rubber. Every heartbeat felt amplified, echoing in her ears. Her palms were sweaty, her knees pressed against the cold tile floor. She whispered to herself, "Stay quiet, stay calm, survive this." Over and over, each repetition a lifeline tethering her to sanity. Then came a sound that made her stomach drop. The soft scraping of something metal against the hallway walls. Slow, deliberate. She imagined it moving closer to her classroom, inching down the hall. Her breath caught. She froze, every muscle locked, willing herself invisible. Her mind spun with questions. What if someone was watching from the other side of the door? What if they knew exactly where we were? Each possibility seemed more terrifying than the last. She felt trapped, surrounded by walls, every ordinary space now a theatre of fear. Through the blinds, she could see shadows shifting again, just out of reach of her vision. Her friends clutched each other silently, all of them paralyzed in the tension, waiting for something, anything, to break the suffocating suspense. And in that moment she realized the truth. Fear isn't just about what's visible. It's about what you imagine, what you anticipate, what your mind fills in the blanks. The school, the classrooms, the hallways, they weren't just ordinary spaces anymore. They were full of possibilities, each one darker, each one more terrifying than the last. She pressed herself into the corner a little tighter, closing her eyes briefly, whispering again, "Just survive. Just survive." Her pulse hammered. Every sound was magnified. Every shadow seemed alive. And the suspense stretched on, slow, suffocating, relentless. The hallway seemed endless, stretching further than she remembered. Every shadow, every corner, every flicker of light felt like it could hide someone or something. Her heart pounded in her chest, loud enough that she was certain the intruder, whoever it was, could hear it. The soft scraping sound returned. Tap, tap, scrape, deliberate, precise. She pressed herself flat against the wall, barely daring to breathe. Her friends clung to each other, whispers shaky and quiet. Every instinct screamed to stay perfectly still. Through the blinds, she saw movement again. A figure gliding silently down the hall, too deliberate to be a student, too stealthy to be a teacher. Her pulse leapt, stomach twisting into knots. She imagined the worst, each scenario darker than the last. Someone waiting behind every door, someone listening just outside the classroom, someone watching, calculating their next move. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The usual hum of the school, lights buzzing, heaters humming, faint chatter in distant hallways, became a cacophony of potential danger. Every sound amplified her fear. Each shadow seemed alive, creeping closer with intent. Her breathing became shallow, her hands cold and clammy. She whispered her mantra, barely audible. Just survive, stay quiet. Each repetition grounded her, tethered her to reality, gave her the courage to remain hidden. Then, a sudden thump from the classroom next door. Something shifted. Her friends gasped silently. The figure in the hallway paused as if listening, calculating. Her stomach lurched. Time slowed. Every second was a battle between fear and hope, paralysis and action. A faint, scraping sound returned, moving closer. She could see the shadow stretching along the hallway floor, inching nearer, deliberate and patient. She pressed herself into the corner, knees to chest, willing herself invisible. The world outside the classroom seemed distant, unreal. Only the hallway, the shadow, the suspense existed now. Her mind raced. Escape? Stay? Hide? Each choice was terrifying. Each possibility could lead to discovery, confrontation, or worse. And all she could do was wait, breath shallow, pulse hammering, heart screaming. Finally, the distant sound of teachers moving in other hallways gave a glimmer of hope. The figure in the hallway hesitated, then slowly retreated. Her pulse slowed slightly, her body trembling uncontrollably. Relief was fragile, fleeting but real. She exhaled, whispering, "It's over. Maybe it's over. But even as she spoke, she knew the fear wouldn't fully leave. Shadows lingered, sounds haunted, and the memory of those moments, the uncertainty, the suspense, the invisible presence, would remain etched into her mind forever. In that moment, she realized something chilling. Ordinary spaces, classrooms, hallways, schools, could become arenas of suspense and terror, just as any home could become a place of danger. And while she had survived the lockdown, the echo of fear followed her long after the bells rang, long after the doors were unlocked, and long after she had left the building. The intercom crackled again, the calm voice of the principal cutting through the thick tension. All clear, lockdown is over, you may resume normal activities. Relief washed over her, tentative and fragile. Her hands were shaking, knees sore from crouching, and every muscle in her body still felt frozen from the tension. But the danger had passed, at least for now. She and her friends slowly rose, glancing at each other. Silent nods, shaky smiles, shared understanding. They had survived together. The hallway, once ominous, now felt almost ordinary again. The echo of footsteps, the flicker of fluorescent lights, the hum of the heaters. All returned to normal, yet nothing felt the same. As they walked to their next class, she couldn't shake the images that lingered. Shadows in hallways, scraping noises, the feeling of being watched. Every ordinary sound seemed loaded with meaning, every corner a potential threat. She realized that the fear didn't fully vanish when the lockdown ended. It stayed, lingering in the mind, coloring every step. Teachers debriefed students, emphasizing that it was a precaution, that no intruder had been found, that the school was safe. But rational reassurances did little to erase the memory of suspense. She replayed every moment, every shadow, every footstep. Even ordinary objects, a locker door, a window blind, a corner of the hallway, could trigger the memory of fear. She reflected on the power of the mind during moments like this. Fear wasn't just about the visible threat. It was about uncertainty, imagination, and anticipation. The lockdown had forced her to confront the unknown, to survive it, and to recognize how fragile the sense of safety truly was. Even as classes resumed and normalcy returned, she found herself glancing over her shoulder, listening for noises, aware of every shadow. The ordinary world had shifted subtly, forever altered by the experience, and yet there was a quiet pride too. She had endured the unknown, faced the suspense, and survived. The fear remained, yes, but so did the realization that she could withstand it. That even in the most ordinary spaces, hallways, classrooms, schools, courage could emerge silently when it mattered most. As the final bell rang and students poured out of classrooms, she took a deep breath. The lockdown was over, the danger had passed, but the lesson lingered. Fear is powerful, suspense is real, and sometimes the ordinary world hides extraordinary terror. And remembering that, she felt a strange mix of vulnerability, awareness, and resilience, ready for whatever story might come next. It was a night like any other on campus. The streets were quiet, the occasional car passing by, the distant hum of the city fading into the background. She had stayed late in the library, immersed in her studies, and now walked alone toward the dorms, backpack slung over her shoulder. The campus lights flickered faintly, some dimmer than usual, casting elongated shadows across the pavement. Her footsteps echoed, too loud in the quiet night. Each echo seemed to stretch, multiplying, bouncing off the buildings around her. A chill ran down her spine, and she pulled her jacket tighter around her. She tried to brush it off. Just the night air, just the quiet. But the feeling lingered. Something wasn't right. Halfway between the library and her dorm, she heard it. a soft shuffle behind her. Not hurried, not frantic, but deliberate. She froze, heart hammering. She thought, maybe it's another student, late like me. Maybe it's nothing. But the instinct in her gut screamed otherwise. She glanced over her shoulder. Empty. Just the dim glow of streetlights and shadows stretching across the campus green. She forced herself to keep walking, trying to sound casual, pretending her fear was just fatigue. Then the sound returned. Closer this time, a soft footstep just behind her. Her pulse spiked. She quickened her pace, backpack bouncing against her back. Each step echoed, each heartbeat louder than the last. She reached the edge of the quad and paused, scanning the dimly lit paths. Everything seemed empty. The trees swayed gently in the wind, casting shifting shadows that made the familiar campus feel strange, unfamiliar. She considered calling her roommate, but her hands were trembling, and the thought of speaking aloud made her feel exposed. Instead, she whispered to herself, "Just get to the dorm, just get there," and moved faster, staying in the pools of light whenever possible. A shadow shifted again, just at the edge of her vision. Something moved between the buildings, slow, deliberate, almost stalking. Her stomach twisted. Every instinct told her, don't look back, keep moving, survive. Minutes dragged. Every sound, rustling leaves, distant footsteps, faint wind, became magnified, filled with potential threat. She imagined someone following her, hiding, waiting for the perfect moment. Her mind raced through every story she had ever heard about late-night encounters on campus, each one replaying vividly. She finally saw her dorm in the distance, lights glowing warmly through the windows. Relief surged, fragile but present. Yet even as she approached, every shadow along the path, every flicker of light, every distant noise made her heart pound with lingering fear. And in that quiet, eerie night, she realized danger often hides in the ordinary, in the routine, in places you assume are safe. And even when the lights are on, even when the doors are locked, the sense of being watched, of being followed, can creep in, silent but unrelenting. She could feel it now. The presence behind her, patient, deliberate, tracking her every step. The quiet of the campus made it worse. Every distant hum, every rustle of leaves, every creak of the walkway sounded amplified, as if each sound were being directed right at her. Her backpack felt heavier than usual, her shoulders tense. She whispered to herself, "Stay calm, just keep walking." But her voice shook despite the attempt at reassurance. The path ahead twisted slightly, lined with low shrubs and tall shadows from the buildings. She imagined the figure stepping out from the darkness, silent and watching, calculating. Her pulse quickened, every step echoing unnaturally in the empty night. She tried to focus on the dorm in the distance. The warm lights were a beacon, but every shadow along the way felt alive, moving just at the edge of her vision. She kept telling herself it was just her imagination, but instinct screamed otherwise. A faint shuffle echoed behind her. She froze. The sound was too deliberate to be random. Tap, tap, scrape. And then silence. Her breath caught. She dared not look back, fearing that the moment she did, she would see him, whoever it was, lurking, waiting, poised. Her mind raced. What if someone really is following me? What if they've been tracking me since the library? Do I run? Do I hide? Each thought spun faster than her racing heartbeat. She forced herself to keep walking, sticking to the lit path. The shadows stretched unnaturally, twisting with each sway of the trees, each flicker of light. Every step brought her closer to safety, but also closer to the unknown that lurked just beyond her vision. Then came a sudden sound, the scrape of something metal against the pavement, a trash can perhaps, or something else. Her stomach twisted as adrenaline surged. She held her breath, pressed herself tighter against the path's edge, imagining every worst-case scenario. She whispered again, "Just get to the dorm. Just get there. Stay calm. Survive." Her friends' voices would normally echo in her mind, comforting, but tonight she walked alone, relying only on her own instincts and courage. The dorm finally loomed closer, its lights warmer and brighter with each step. She dared a glance behind. Nothing. Just shadows, still and silent. But the feeling of being watched lingered, clinging to her like a second skin, and in that stretch of quiet, eerie campus night, she understood something terrifying yet oddly grounding. Fear doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't need to. It creeps quietly, patiently, and sometimes the only way to survive is to keep moving, step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat. She was so close now. The dorm entrance glowed just ahead, warm, inviting, safe. She could almost feel the relief of stepping inside, hearing the door click shut behind her. But even with safety in sight, the air around her felt wrong, too heavy, too still. She slowed, listening. At first, there was only silence, the faint hum of a vending machine, the distant rattle of leaves in the breeze. But then, there it was again. Footsteps, slow, steady, almost in rhythm with her own, as though someone was mimicking her pace. Her stomach sank. This time she knew she wasn't imagining it. She could feel it. Someone was there. She stopped abruptly, heart hammering. And the footsteps? They stopped too. Her breath came shallow, almost ragged. She didn't dare turn around. Every instinct told her, don't give him the satisfaction of seeing your fear. Don't make eye contact. Just keep moving. But the silence stretched too long, too sharp, and the fear inside her grew unbearable. Slowly, almost against her own will, she turned. And there, at the far end of the walkway, half shrouded in shadow, stood a figure. Tall, still impossible to read, no movement, no face she could make out, just watching. She froze. 1,000 thoughts hit her at once. Do I scream? Do I run? Will he chase me? Her mouth was dry, her legs felt like lead. Then the figure moved, just one slow step forward, then another. No rush, no hesitation, deliberate, calm, like he knew he had all the time in the world. Her body reacted before her mind could. She bolted, backpack bouncing, sneakers slapping against the pavement, every ounce of adrenaline flooding her veins. She sprinted for the dorm entrance, heart screaming louder than her thoughts. Behind her, she could hear it, the footsteps breaking into a run now, heavy and fast. The sound echoed across the quiet campus, closer with every second. Her fingers fumbled with her key card as she reached the door. Twice she missed the scanner, panic blinding her. On the third try, beep, the lock released. She shoved the door open, threw herself inside, and slammed it shut. Silence. Her chest heaved, lungs burning, ears straining for any sound beyond the glass. For a moment, she thought she saw movement, a shadow passing just outside the door. But then, nothing, just stillness. She slid down against the wall, shaking uncontrollably, tears blurring her vision. She wasn't sure if she was safe or if the nightmare had only begun. Because the truth was terrifying. Whoever that figure was, they hadn't been deterred. They hadn't shouted or made a sound. They had simply followed, patient, calm. And she realized with a chill that would haunt her long after that night. Sometimes the scariest encounters don't end when the door closes. Sometimes they linger, waiting, watching. For the next time, you're alone. You know what makes that story even scarier? The fact that it happened in a place that's supposed to feel safe. A college campus, late at night. That's where you're supposed to be surrounded by people, by lights, by the comfort of community. But when the halls are empty, when the lights flicker and you're the only one walking, suddenly it doesn't feel safe at all. And that's the thing with these encounters. The scariest part isn't always what actually happens, but what could have happened. The figure didn't speak, didn't attack. They just followed. Quiet. Patient. And that's almost worse, because it leaves you with the question, why? And if you thought being stalked on a campus walkway was unsettling, wait until you hear the next story. Because the next one doesn't take place outside under the cover of darkness. No, it happens inside a place we all grew up thinking of as safe. A house, 4 walls, locked doors, the place you lay your head at night. But what happens when that safety is shattered? When the person you least expect ends up on the other side of that door? That brings us to our 5th story tonight. The stranger at the window. It was late, maybe a little after midnight, when she first noticed it. Her house was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence where you can hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, and even your own breathing if you stop to listen. She was curled up on the couch, half asleep, watching some rerun she wasn't really paying attention to. The glow from the TV was the only light in the living room, everything else swallowed by shadow. Outside, the wind brushed softly against the siding of the house, the occasional creak of the roof, settling, filling the spaces in between. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It was soft, a light tap-tap against the glass. At first, she thought it was just a tree branch scratching in the wind, but the rhythm was wrong, too deliberate, too steady. Her head snapped toward the window, her heart skipping a beat. The curtains were drawn halfway, leaving a sliver of the glass exposed. From where she sat, she couldn't see much, just darkness beyond the faint reflection of the TV screen. She swallowed hard, telling herself not to overthink it. Probably nothing, just the house, just the night. But a few minutes later, it came again. Tap, 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 this time louder. Her stomach twisted. She grabbed the remote and muted the TV. The silence was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. She waited, straining her ears, every muscle tense. Nothing. She let out a shaky breath and forced a laugh under her breath. I'm just tired, she thought. I'm hearing things. But then it came again. This time, not a tap. A slow, dragging sound across the glass, as though someone's finger, or maybe someone's nail, was tracing a line along the window. Her blood ran cold. She stood slowly, every nerve screaming at her to stay still, but she couldn't. Step by step, she moved toward the window, her socks silent against the floorboards. She reached out, fingertips brushing the curtain. Her pulse thudded so loud it felt like it filled the room. She hesitated. Should she look? Should she call someone? Should she run? Finally, with a quick jerk, she pulled the curtain back. Nothing. Just her own reflection staring back at her, wide-eyed and pale, framed by the dim TV glow. Outside, the yard stretched into darkness, the faint outline of trees swaying in the wind. Empty. But the strange thing was, and the glass itself, there were streaks, smudges, long faint trails across the window, like something oily had been dragged across it by hand. Her chest tightened. She took a step back, unable to tear her eyes away from the marks. She whispered to herself, barely audible, someone was here, watching. She stood frozen in front of that glass, staring at the smudge marks like they could explain themselves. The streaks looked greasy, uneven, almost like the trail left by fingertips pressed too hard against the surface. Her throat went dry. She whispered again, this time a little louder. Someone was here, but she was alone in the living room. Completely alone. The house felt too big all of a sudden, the shadows too deep. She took a step back from the window and pulled the curtains shut fast, as though blocking the view outside could block out the terror twisting in her gut. She grabbed her phone from the coffee table. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it, debating whether to call someone. The police? A friend? Her parents? But the rational side of her brain argued, what if it's nothing? What if I'm overreacting? And just as she was convincing herself to let it go, there it was again. Another sound, not at the window this time. This one came from the back of the house. A slow creak, like someone had stepped on the porch outside the kitchen door. Her stomach dropped. She spun toward the hallway that led to the kitchen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might shake the walls. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, because silence meant waiting, anticipating. She whispered to herself, "No. No, no, no," and forced herself to move. Her bare feet padded softly on the hardwood floor as she crept down the hall. Each step felt heavier than the last. She pressed her back to the wall near the kitchen doorway, straining her ears. For a long moment there was nothing. Just the faint hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock on the wall. And then a sharp knock, 3 steady raps on the glass kitchen door. She nearly dropped her phone, clutching it so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't want to look. She didn't want to know. But she couldn't stop herself. Slowly, she turned her head toward the door. The curtain over the glass panel swayed gently, like it had just been touched. Beyond it, through the faint gaps, she swore she saw the suggestion of a face. Just an outline, a shadow, waiting. Her breath caught in her throat. She whispered, almost pleading with herself, "It's just my imagination, it's just shadows, that's all." But deep down, she knew someone was out there. Someone was watching her house, circling it, testing it. She backed slowly away from the kitchen, never breaking eye contact with that faint outline. Step by step, retreating down the hall, heart thundering, phone clutched tight in her hand. And in that moment, one terrifying thought anchored itself in her mind. If they're bold enough to knock, they're bold enough to come inside. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering like a drum in her chest. The candle holder in her hand wobbled slightly with each shallow, panicked breath. Her phone sat in the other hand, screen dark, useless, or maybe it was her lifeline. She wasn't sure anymore. The hallway was silent. Too silent. And that silence was heavy, almost physical, pressing against her shoulders and neck. She tried to steady herself, telling herself, "It's okay, it's fine, just stay calm." But her own words sounded hollow in the echoing quiet. Her ears strained, trying to catch the tiniest sound. And then she heard it. A soft shuffle, not loud, not immediate, but deliberate. Measured, like someone was testing the floorboards with careful steps, someone who wanted her to notice, wanted her to panic. Her pulse spiked, she froze, mid-breath. Her legs trembled as she forced herself to stay quiet. She whispered to herself, almost pleading, "Just stay calm and it's fine, it's fine." But she knew it wasn't fine. The candle flickered, casting shadows that twisted and stretched along the walls. The shapes seemed alive, moving independently, pooling into corners that hadn't existed a moment before. Her own imagination blurred with reality. Every creak, every whisper of the house felt like footsteps, like breathing, like someone watching. Her eyes darted toward the living room. The window she had stared at earlier, the one with the shadowy outline, felt miles away, though it was just across the hall. A shiver ran down her spine. She didn't want to look again, not yet. And then another sound, a soft tap. Not from the window this time. From the hallway behind her. She spun around. Nothing. Just darkness stretching farther than she remembered. Her breath caught in her throat. The hair on her arms stood on end. Her hands tightened around the candle holder. She whispered again, almost to herself, "Okay. Okay. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just the house." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't nothing. The soft shuffle became a deliberate step. Closer. Her stomach sank. Every instinct screamed to run, to hide, to do anything. But her body refused to move. Her eyes scanned the darkness, trying to catch a shape, a shadow, anything that would give away the intruder's position. Then came a sound that made her freeze completely, a low, dragging noise like someone moving a heavy object across the floor. It wasn't hurried, wasn't clumsy. It was careful, intentional. She realized in that moment he wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. He was patient. He wanted her fear. Her heart raced uncontrollably. She tried to plan. The front door, too far. The back door, maybe, but he could be there already. The staircase leading upstairs. Every option was a gamble, every shadow a potential trap. Her fingers trembled around her phone. Could she call? Could she alert someone? But one wrong sound could give her away. One wrong movement, and he would know exactly where she was. A whisper of movement from the far end of the hall caught her attention. She peered, straining her eyes. The candle flickered violently, and for a split second she saw it, a dark silhouette standing just at the edge of the light. She jerked back, nearly stumbling, and pressed herself harder against the wall. The hallway seemed to stretch, elongating the distance between her and the threat, every second slowing down unbearably. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, even her own ragged breaths became deafening. Her mind raced. Should she hide? Should she try to flee? Every instinct screamed one thing: don't stay here. But the intruder's patience was terrifying. He wasn't chasing yet. He was watching, waiting, savoring. Another shuffle, closer. She whispered again, almost like a prayer. "Please, just don't." The candlelight flickered one last time, throwing the shadows into sharp relief. And in that moment, she realized something she hadn't accepted before. He wasn't just in the house. He was inside her fear. He was inside her mind. He had already won the first round. Her chest tightened. Her hands ached from gripping the candle. She slid slowly down the wall to the floor, phone clutched like a lifeline. And that's when she heard it, a faint, deliberate click coming from somewhere deeper in the house. A door moving? Someone testing her space inch by inch. Her stomach dropped. She pressed herself flat, eyes wide, listening, waiting. Every second stretched, every heartbeat thudded like a drum, announcing her terror. And she knew. Whatever came next, there would be no turning back. She couldn't stay in the hallway any longer. Every second spent pressed against the wall felt like it stretched into an eternity. The silence around her was heavy, suffocating, but worse. She could feel him moving somewhere in the house. Every creak, every whisper of the old floorboards made her flinch. Her hands trembled as she clutched the candle holder and the phone. The screen glowed faintly, but calling for help felt impossible. One wrong sound, one panicked gasp, and he would know exactly where she was. She scanned the hallway. The staircase leading upstairs loomed ahead, dark and foreboding. Maybe she could barricade herself in a bedroom. Maybe. And then instinct took over. She bolted. Her bare feet slapped against the hardwood, echoing like thunder. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. And behind her, she heard it. One footstep, then another. Slow, calculated, following her every move. Her mind raced. She had to choose. The bedroom upstairs, the front door. Any option felt like a gamble, and she knew he was counting on that fear. She reached the stairs and scrambled up, 2 steps at a time. The old wood groaned under her weight. At the top, she darted toward the first bedroom, praying the door would be locked. It was. Thank God. She slammed herself against it and twisted the handle, holding her breath. A shadow flickered at the end of the hall, not moving quickly, just standing there, waiting. Her pulse jumped. She could almost feel the figure's eyes on her, watching, analyzing. Her mind screamed at her to hide. She slipped into the closet, yanking hangers down to barricade the door. Pressing her body flat against the wall, she tried to slow her breathing. And then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside the closet. One. Slow. Intentional. Her heart thundered. She gripped her phone tighter, whispering under her breath, "Please, don't, just go away." Another step, and another. The intruder wasn't rushing. He was savoring the moment, letting her terror build, letting her imagination fill the space with worst-case scenarios. The darkness itself seemed alive, pressing in from all sides. She tried to calculate an escape. The window? Risky. The door? He'd find her. The hallway? Too exposed. She was trapped in the tension, every second stretching into an eternity. Then a soft, metallic rattle. The closet door handle moved slightly. Her stomach dropped. She had to act. With trembling hands, she yanked the closet door open and bolted toward the window. Candle dropped, glass clinking against the floor. Her body surged with adrenaline. Outside, the cold night air hit her like a shock wave. Barefoot, she ran across the yard, heart still hammering, ears straining for the slightest sound behind her. She didn't stop until she reached the glow of a neighbor's porch light. Barefoot, she ran across the yard, heart still hammering, ears straining for the slightest sound behind her. She didn't stop until she reached the glow of a neighbor's porch light. She pounded on the door, gasping, shivering. Relief and terror collided as the neighbor opened it. Safe? Maybe. But the memory of that night, the creaking floorboards, the shadow at the window, would follow her for a long time, and she realized some fear doesn't end when you escape. Some terror lingers. Waiting. Watching. She pressed herself flat against the closet wall, trying to make herself as small as possible, chest heaving, hands gripping the phone and candle holder so tightly it hurt, knuckles white. Every sound, the faint hum of the fridge, the tick of the clock, even her own ragged breathing, echoed through the room like a warning. Then she heard it. The slow, deliberate click of a door opening somewhere deeper in the house, and her stomach dropped. Not the closet door, another door, and he was moving again, step by measured step, the floorboards creaking beneath him, each sound amplified in her terror. She bit her lip and whispered under her breath, "Stay calm, just stay calm." Her body shook as the shadow of his presence grew closer, and she realized he wasn't just after her. He was here to consume her fear. Every heartbeat, every flinch, every gasp fed him. A soft scrape came from the hallway outside, circling, searching, testing her hiding spot, while the candle flickered violently, throwing jagged shadows that twisted and seemed alive. Then the closet door handle shifted slowly, deliberately trying it, and her stomach dropped again as her mind raced. Could she fight? Could she run? Any option impossible, the fear pressing like a weight against her. And then she heard it, a breath, not hers, close, too close, and her pulse throbbed in her ears. She raised the candle, flickering light revealing a dark figure, massive, silent, unreal. Instinct took over. She bolted, candle crashing to the floor, heart hammering, darting toward the window. The cold night air hit her like a shockwave as she climbed out, bare feet scraping the sill, and behind her the house was silent again. Too silent, but she knew he hadn't left. Some fear follows, lingers, waits for the next time the lights go out, for the next moment you're alone. She ran across the yard, lungs burning, every step fueled by terror and desperation, not stopping until she reached the neighbor's porch light, pounding on the door, relief and lingering fear colliding in her chest, and realizing some terror doesn't end when you escape. It shadows you, waits, and the memory of that night, the sounds, the shadows, the deliberate steps, would haunt her long after the door was locked. She finally collapsed at the neighbor's doorstep, lungs burning, heart hammering, hands still trembling. Even with safety just a few feet away, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was still out there, just beyond the edge of the streetlight, waiting. She replayed every sound, every shadow, every deliberate step of the intruder in her mind, realizing that some fear doesn't leave you the moment you escape. It lingers. It watches. And tonight, she knew, it had imprinted itself on her forever. She finally dared to breathe, tried to calm herself, but her gaze drifted back to the dark silhouette of her house. The windows looked normal, silent, empty. But in her chest, she knew the truth. The terror didn't stay inside the walls. It had followed her to the edge of safety. And as she stood there, shivering in the cool night air, she realized this wasn't the last story she'd hear or tell tonight. Some horrors hide quietly, waiting for the next moment, the next person, the next creak in a familiar floorboard. Speaking of hidden horrors, not all fear hides outside the home. Some of it waits silently in the places we think are safe, locked away, until curiosity or fate decides to open the door. Which brings us to the next story, the locked attic. She had just moved back into her family home after college, excited to reclaim it as her own. The house smelled of polished wood, old books, and faint memories of her childhood, comforting in a way only familiar places can be. The quiet creaks of the floorboards under her feet felt nostalgic at first, like the house was greeting her. But that night, as she wandered down the long hallway, her eyes were drawn to the attic door. Small, tucked away, it had always been easy to ignore, but now it seemed to loom, oddly imposing under the dim hallway light, almost like it was silently watching her. A faint scratch along the edge caught her attention, tiny grooves that didn't belong, as if someone, or something, had tried to open it from the other side. She laughed nervously to herself. Probably just my imagination, or the cat. But curiosity gnawed at her, an invisible pull she couldn't resist. Sliding her hand along the cold, smooth wood of the door, a shiver ran down her spine. Her eyes fell to the old-fashioned keyhole, rusty but intact. She whispered, "Who even has a key to this?" And the air around her seemed heavier, colder. Then she heard it, a faint scrape high above in the attic. Her stomach twisted. The house was empty, completely empty. Another scrape followed, deliberate and careful. She froze, her pulse racing. Someone or something was up there. Fear mixed with fascination. Her pulse quickened as she debated what to do. Should she ignore it? Leave it locked and pretend she hadn't noticed? Or confront whatever waited above her? Her hands shook as she grabbed a flashlight. its weak beam cutting through the darkness. Each step up the narrow stairs groaned under her weight, echoing in the silent house. Every sound stretched time, making her heart pound faster, every instinct screaming at her to turn back. Reaching the attic door, she knelt to inspect the lock. The faint scratch marks inside the keyhole looked fresh, tiny grooves as if someone had recently tried to pick it. Her breath caught. "Stay calm. Just stay calm," she whispered, but the words felt hollow. The attic seemed to loom above her, dark and impenetrable, almost alive, and yet despite her fear, she felt pulled forward, drawn by some invisible, irresistible force. Finally, she slid the flashlight into her pocket and tried the door again. Rusty and stubborn, it resisted her first push, creaking loudly in protest. Slowly, she forced it open. Inside, darkness, thick, almost solid. Dust motes floated in the weak beam of light, and the air smelled wrong, damp, heavy, metallic. Then faintly, she thought she heard a whisper. So soft it could have been the house settling, or something else entirely. Her heart froze, every instinct screaming at her to run, but she couldn't move, trapped by a mixture of curiosity and terror. Step by step, she edged further into the attic. The floorboards were brittle, threatening to crack beneath her weight. Old trunks covered in dust and cobwebs loomed like silent sentinels. She ran her fingers along the edge of one, shivering as the dust puffed into the air, glittering like tiny ghosts in her flashlight's beam. Every sound, the soft scuff of her feet, the creak of a trunk lid in the corner, echoed unnaturally, making her imagination fill the space with shadowy figures. Then, as she turned a corner, she saw it, a small, forgotten hatch at the back of the attic. Its wood was warped, the hinges rusted, but something about it sent a chill through her spine. It was almost as if it were waiting for her to open it. She froze, her hands trembling, heart hammering, debating whether to step back or lift the hatch. A faint breeze seemed to drift from the small gap beneath it, carrying with it a cold, metallic scent that made her stomach twist. Finally, curiosity won. She reached for the hatch, pulling it open slowly, listening to the soft groan of old wood. Beyond it, darkness stretched deeper than the attic itself, almost swallowing the weak flashlight beam. The air smelled heavier, damp and stale, as though it hadn't been disturbed in decades. A whisper, or maybe it was just her imagination, echoed faintly from within, making her heart skip a beat. And in that moment, she realized the attic held secrets that weren't meant to be discovered, things that had been waiting quietly, patiently, for someone curious enough to open the wrong door. She stepped deeper into the attic, each movement deliberate, heart hammering as if it could echo through the entire house. The weak beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of forgotten boxes and trunks covered in thick layers of dust. The air was heavier here, damp and stale, carrying a faint metallic tang that made her stomach twist. She reached out, brushing her fingers along an old wooden beam, feeling its rough grain beneath her trembling hands. Somewhere above her, the rafters groaned as if reacting to her presence, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the house itself was alive, watching her every move. A sudden shuffle made her freeze. Her breath caught in her throat. It sounded like something or someone had moved in the corner of the attic, just beyond the edge of her light. She squinted, heart racing, but saw nothing. The shadows twisted and shifted as if mocking her fear, stretching the thin circle of light across the dusty floor. She whispered to herself, almost pleading, "It's just the house. It's just old wood settling. Nothing else." But even as she said it, her own words sounded hollow. Her eyes fell on an old trunk she hadn't noticed before. It was larger than the others, carved with strange symbols she didn't recognize, edges worn smooth by time. She knelt slowly, brushing away the thick layer of dust. The metal latch was tarnished, but as she touched it, a sharp chill ran down her spine. The air seemed to shift around her, colder now, heavier, and she realized with a sinking feeling that she wasn't alone. Something had been waiting for her, hiding quietly in the attic, and her intrusion had awoken it. She debated whether to open the trunk, curiosity battling with terror. Finally trembling, she lifted the lid. Dust puffed out, glittering in the flashlight's weak beam, and a faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to escape from inside. She recoiled, heart hammering, but a strange compulsion drew her closer. The smell hit her then, damp, metallic, like something decayed, mingled with the dust. She gagged, stepping back, but couldn't stop staring at the dark interior. Every instinct screamed at her to run, yet part of her, something deep inside, wanted to see what had been hidden for so long. Then a sudden creak from the far corner of the attic made her spin around. The beam of her flashlight caught the suggestion of movement, a shadow slipping between the stacks of boxes, too fluid, too deliberate to be imagined. Her pulse leapt. She whispered to herself, "Stay calm, just stay calm." But the voice trembled. Every hair on her arm stood on end. She realized with a jolt the attic wasn't empty. Something else was here, waiting, watching, and it had been patient for a very long time. She backed toward the small hatch she had seen earlier, flashlight shaking, trying to put distance between herself and whatever was moving. Her foot struck an old crate, sending it toppling with a loud crash. She froze, heart hammering, expecting a response. Nothing. Only the faint whisper of the attic settling. Or was it? She didn't dare look back. Every nerve in her body screamed that she wasn't imagining it. The shadows seemed to close in around her. Dust swirled with each step she took, the floorboards groaning under her weight. She could feel her breath puffing out in short, frantic bursts, each one a countdown in her mind. Every instinct told her to run, but the attic was a maze, and she didn't know the way back. Panic bubbled in her chest, mixing with the cold dread that had settled in her bones. Then, from deep within the attic, a sound, a low, dragging noise, echoed toward her. She stiffened, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. The sound came closer, slow, deliberate, and she realized with horror that it was following her. She couldn't see it yet, but she could feel it, like a weight pressing through the darkness. Her hands shook violently as she clutched the hatch, finally forcing it open. The night air hit her like a wall, cold and biting. She almost fell, scrambling onto the stairs leading down from the attic. But she kept moving, heart pounding, knowing the presence was still there, watching, waiting, patient. The attic had secrets, and she had just begun to uncover them. She stumbled down the attic stairs, each step creaking loudly under her weight, echoing through the empty house like a warning. The cold night air from the open hatch hit her face, sharp and biting, making her shiver violently. Her flashlight flickered as she adjusted her grip, casting erratic shadows that danced along the walls, making the hallway look alive. She paused for a moment, heart hammering, listening. But all she could hear was her own ragged breathing and the faint hum of the house settling. Then came the sound, a soft thud from above, subtle but deliberate, like someone or something had followed her to the top of the stairs. She froze, muscles tensing, every instinct screaming to run, but curiosity, fear, and disbelief rooted her to the spot. She whispered under her breath, "It can't be real, it's just the house, just the wind." Yet every hair on her arm stood on end. She crept into the hallway, flashlight shaking, trying to reach the living room. The shadows seemed to close in around her, stretching across the walls, pooling into corners that weren't there before. Her mind raced with possibilities. What had been in the attic? Was it still up there? Was it following her? Each thought felt heavier than the last, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. A sudden scraping noise echoed from the attic hatch above her. She spun around, heart skipping a beat, but saw nothing. The hatch was closed now, and the faint scratches along the wood seemed older than she remembered. Her pulse thrummed in her ears. She knew she had to get out of the house, to breathe fresh air, to put distance between herself and whatever was in the attic. She dashed across the hallway, but then the lights flickered violently, plunging her into semi-darkness. Her flashlight trembled in her hands as she struggled to keep it steady. Somewhere behind her, she thought she heard the faint drag of something moving across the floor, too deliberate to be imagination. Panic clawed at her chest, urging her to run faster, but the hallway seemed longer than it should have been, twisting in shadows and uncertainty. She reached the front door, fumbling with the lock, hands slick with sweat. Just as the key turned, a loud crash came from the attic. Something heavy falling, hitting the floor with a sound that reverberated through the house. Her stomach dropped. She didn't look back. She swung the door open and bolted into the night, lungs burning, heart hammering, every sense screaming that she had barely escaped. Out in the yard, the cool night air washed over her, and she finally took a shaky breath. The house loomed behind her, silent, almost innocuous, but she knew the truth. The attic held something patient, waiting, watching, and tonight she had barely scratched the surface. The fear lingered in her chest, heavy and inescapable. Even as she ran toward the streetlight at the end of the driveway, she knew one thing for certain. The attic was not done with her, and neither was the terror it harbored. Some secrets, she realized, never stay hidden forever. She collapsed on the front steps, knees trembling, flashlight dangling loosely in her hand. The cold night air cut through her clothes, but she barely noticed. Her chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, still hearing faint echoes of movement from the attic. The house behind her looked quiet, almost peaceful, but she knew better. Every shadow along its walls felt alive, and every gust of wind whispered secrets she didn't want to hear. Her mind replayed every detail from the attic, the carved trunk, the whispers, the shadows slipping between boxes. It all seemed unreal, yet terrifyingly vivid. She whispered to herself, "It's just the house. Just the house." But deep down, she knew that what had been waiting above wasn't ordinary. Something patient, something deliberate, had been observing her for longer than she could imagine. Tentatively she stood, brushing the dust and dirt from her clothes. She glanced back at the attic hatch, high in the roof, imagining it opening on its own. The hairs on her arms stood on end. She tried to convince herself that it was over, that she had escaped, but the sense of being watched lingered, heavy in her chest. Every instinct screamed that this was far from finished. Slowly, she made her way around the yard toward the street, flashlight beam cutting narrow paths through the shadows. The wind rustled leaves in a way that sounded almost like whispering voices, echoing through the trees. She quickened her pace, heart hammering, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was following, just beyond sight, patient, silent, waiting for her next move. A faint light flickered in one of the attic windows, or perhaps it was just her imagination. Her stomach dropped. She stopped, holding her breath, straining to see. Nothing moved. Still, the memory of the shadows, the whispers, the deliberate steps in the attic stayed with her, pressing in her mind. She shivered, realizing that some fears don't vanish once you escape. They shadow you, linger in corners of your vision, in the quiet moments when you least expect them. Finally, She reached the end of the street where the porch light of a neighbor's house offered a small sense of safety. She leaned against the post, trying to calm herself, but the house behind her stood silent, yet heavy, like it was holding its breath. She knew without a doubt that the attic's secret was not done, and she would never truly feel safe under that roof again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the silence. She fumbled with it, seeing a text from a friend she hadn't expected to hear from tonight. "You okay? You sounded weird on the phone earlier." She typed back slowly, hands still shaking. I'm fine, just a long night." Yet the words felt empty, meaningless, because deep down, she knew she had narrowly escaped something far more sinister than she could explain. She took one last look at the house before turning toward the streetlights, taking cautious steps into the safety of the night. The shadows from the attic seemed to linger in her mind, whispering faintly, as though promising they weren't done. Not yet. And in that moment, she realized that some stories, some fears, never truly end. They just wait for the next curious soul to discover them. She finally sank onto the neighbor's porch swing, the wooden boards creaking beneath her weight. The night air was cool, almost soothing, but she couldn't stop shivering, not from the cold, but from the memory of the attic. Every shadow, every whisper, every scrape of wood played on repeat in her mind. She rubbed her arms, trying to convince herself it was over. "It's just the house. It's done. It's over," she whispered, though the words felt hollow. Her eyes kept flicking back to the house, its dark silhouette framed against the night sky. The windows stared back like blank eyes, watching, patient, as though the house itself were holding its breath, waiting. She couldn't shake the feeling that the attic's secret wasn't finished, that something had been awakened and now lingered, silently, in its shadowed corners. A soft rustle came from the yard, a branch brushing against the fence, or maybe the wind, but her heart leapt anyway. She held her breath, straining to hear. Nothing. Yet the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She realized with a sinking feeling that the sense of being watched wasn't just in the house. It had followed her into the night, a quiet, invisible presence that refused to leave. She reached for her phone again, scrolling aimlessly, trying to distract herself. But in the silence between texts and notifications, she imagined footsteps from the attic echoing in her ears. She shivered, laughing nervously at herself. "I'm just imagining things, right?" But she wasn't so sure anymore. Some fears, she thought, are patient. They wait for the right moment to make themselves known again. Finally, she stood, brushing off the porch swing. She walked slowly down the sidewalk toward the streetlights that offered some semblance of safety. Each step felt heavy, as though invisible eyes were tracking her, silently observing. She glanced back once more at the house, and for a brief moment she swore she saw a faint shadow move behind one of the attic windows. Her breath caught. She blinked, and it was gone. But the feeling didn't leave. She realized that the house's secrets were patient. They weren't done. They never truly are. And she knew, deep down, that curiosity might lure someone else back one day into the attic's waiting darkness. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the racing of her heart, and whispered to herself, "Some things are better left alone." And yet, in the stillness of the night, she couldn't shake the knowledge that the attic story wasn't finished. Not really. As she walked into the streetlights, a distant shadow seemed to flicker in her peripheral vision. She didn't look back again, but the feeling lingered, a reminder that some horrors don't end with the dawn. And for those willing to listen closely, the house still has secrets to tell. And that's it. 6 chilling, true-to-life horror stories that will haunt your thoughts long after the lights go out. If you felt a shiver run down your spine, or if your heart skipped a beat more than once, then you're not alone. I'd love to know which story freaked you out the most. Were you the most scared by the midnight knocking, the stranger at the window, or the attic that shouldn't have been opened? Drop a comment and let me know where you were listening from. I always get curious about who's joining me in the dark. If you want more terrifying stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next spine-chilling episode. And remember, these stories aren't just for listening. They're meant to be experienced. So keep your lights low, headphones on, and imagination ready. Thanks for spending the hour or two with me tonight. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep at all.